Well, happy Tuesday, everyone. I'm Dr. Laurie Davis coming to you from the Disability Channel here on the Today Show. And of course, Tuesday is Finance Day. Dr. Ramin will be here. He's just having some challenges on his end. Technology, as it works. When it works, it's great. When it doesn't work, it's not so great. But I know today he wants to talk about how presidential elections affect the markets. So that will be very interesting information. If he can't get into the studio, we'll bring him in by phone and he'll be here to chat with us. In the meantime, I would share a few things with you, a few items. We are doing a fundraiser for the Global Society for Female Entrepreneurs on October 20th, the evening of October the 20th, and it's a 2-hour workshop. It costs $25. All proceeds go directly to the organization. And we're going to talk about 10 ways to build my business. So whether you are a brand new business owner, you are a seasoned business owner, or you're even just thinking about maybe you'd like to be a business owner, that would be very valuable information. And we've been delivering that workshop for years. So we take 10 hours of information and we jam it into 2 hours. So that's Sunday night, October 20th. So if you're interested and wanting to do that, you can contact me directly for a flyer. Let me just get my email up here. Or you can just call me or text me. I say call the doc and text me there that you're interested in a seat, and we'll make sure that happens. It's $25 in US funds for that workshop, 10 ways to grow my business. And let's see, in an hour's time, we will be broadcasting with Doug Smith. I'm the co-host and the producer of the Press Box, which is our sports show, our weekly sports show. And our guest today, I hope I say it correctly, is Mark Freitas. And he knows an awful lot of information about the Toronto Maple Leafs. So if you're a Maple Leafs fan, even though dinosaurs were here the last time they won the Stanley Cup, that's okay. It's a team, and we all have had favorites on that team. So good morning, Kathy. Yes, it sounds like a great workshop. They always are, and we learn lots. So thank you for that. And thank you for being here, Kathy. I haven't heard yet from Dr. Ramin, but he's working on it. He's rebooting his computer right now. That's one thing I love about our show. Like, we're just authentic. It's real. Like, we'll just tell you the way it is. And it's that's just the way it is. Something else we do, and I can fill in the blanks here. When I met Dr. Ramin about 3.5 years ago, he first came to me as a client, and he wanted to take some of our workshops. And I have to brag about him, especially when he's not here. I deliver 100 workshops. If people want to learn how to be an entrepreneur, a professional entrepreneur, we have 100 workshops on how to do that. It takes a year. It's like going to university again. And so he decided he'd like to have that workshop. And he attended all 100 workshops and never missed one. Perfect attendance for a whole year. So that's how I met him. And then, of course, when I realized his background was finance, he has every financial credential that you can actually get in the United States of America, including 2 MBA degrees. So this is a guy who's really credentialed, but also, amazingly enough, it's not just about the credentials and the paper and the certificates. This is the first guy I've ever met that crunches numbers and has a heart. Here he is. Good morning.
Good morning. The joys of technology. My apologies, it's still computer's still restarting. So
yeah, that's okay. Well, it's all right because I was just bragging about you.
Oh no!
Yes, I was. And Kathy, can you just let us know, and Sylvia's here too, can you let us know if you can hear Ramin? I've put him on speaker. He's on the phone. So make sure you speak up nice and loud there, Ramin.
Oh, okay.
So we'll do a little
Well,
test. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you girls hear him?
all right. Good morning, everyone. Do I sound?
Well, we don't know yet. I'm waiting to hear from them.
Okay, well,
I
I'll
can
try.
hear you. I can hear you okay.
All right, let me see my laptop.
I'm on speaker. Yes, they can hear you just fine. Thank you. And just a little bit louder, if you don't mind.
All right, so is it better?
Yes, and I'll make sure
Okay.
my volume is up as well.
Okay.
All right. Well, I've already announced what you're going to talk about, presidential elections, and but in the meantime, other than the technology, how are you doing in California this morning?
I'm doing good. It's a beautiful day, and no complaining. It's fall, so it's awesome. So it's so good. Thank
Oh,
you.
all right. So we're very interested in the topic today because, of course, there's big elections happening in the United States. I'm keeping my eye on things. So you thought it would be timely for us to talk about how presidential elections affect the markets. Am I correct in that, Ramin?
Yes. So we have exactly 6 weeks to go, and it has been obviously already has been an exciting few months, to just say the least. And of course, this has been the busiest election year in the history globally. So more than half of the population has been going to the referendum and choosing presidents, whether it's from prime ministers, whether from India to Russia, Brazil, and here we are, United States. Obviously, United States has the most influence, still being a powerhouse. So many countries many nations do follow our elections here in the United States because whether politically or economically, they are dependent on the directions. So that's what I thought, with 6 weeks to go. First of all, we want to find out, does that make any difference who is in power? Which party is in power? And you're going to look at the history. If anyway we know who's going to be elected before, based on the markets, and whether the markets actually get affected, and how do they get affected, especially in stock markets, and then the currency, can they be affected as far as who's the president and how the election goes. So that's the topic, and we can start with that. If you have any questions, I can answer it. If not, we can have a little journey again. So.
All right. Well, once your computer is rebooted and you may try to get into the studio, I'll just keep an eye out and let you in. Otherwise, the phone seems to be working right now.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm working on the laptop as we are speaking, and so see that we can get in. So, yeah. So, let me first of all start why elections do matter, as far as quite a few countries around the globe, especially you look at like Latin America. For the past 20 years, Latin America has been leaning towards left, and of course, a good example would be, Hugo Chavez from Venezuela, up to 2015, and that started a movement. We look at Peru, Bolivia, Chile, even Colombia, Brazil. So these programs do affect the livelihood of the people, the nation, as well as the private sector. So that's the reason we want to pay attention to the elections. And I use Venezuela as an example because Venezuela is one of the richest countries, especially has, would you believe it has higher reserves? We always think about Saudi Arabia. It has a large reserve of crude oil. And yet, it is right now in a very dire situation. Of course, they just had an election, and Nicolas Maduro, he got supposedly reelected. But just think about you being a business owner, or you being a stockholder. Just use an example, and then the government comes and says, you know what? Your company, we're going to privatize, or nationalize the company. Sorry about that. So all of a sudden, wait a minute, I have my shares. What happens? So that's the power that what happens if the new elections or old elections could have, the presidents could have. When we look at Russia, we look at even North African countries, we used to look at Turkey. So there's a lot of power, and it's almost totalitarian. It's almost like they are there for as a dynasty. It's more of a monarchy than presidency. So, but when it comes to United States, of course, with United States, they have the limits for the president. So it's a little different, and we pride ourselves in the democracy and the free elections. And that's what it's important to, again, pay attention globally, but more so in the United States. So we don't really have that, at least not yet, worrying that, the government is going to come and take over our properties, for instance. And that's the privacy and then the property rights. So, but it is important to pay attention globally as far as the world goes. So, one of the things we have to consider when it comes to elections, regardless of who gets in the long run, who gets into the office, believe it or not, it really doesn't matter if it's a Republican or Democrat. It's interesting that all the people who are they have their own party, they believe their party will do better. But in the long run, it's very much into the fundamentals of the economy. But when it gets closer to the elections and after elections, one thing markets don't like is uncertainty. When you look at the history, one of the reasons that the markets go up and down is because there's no certainty. So when there is that risk, for instance, we had like in the year 2000, if you recall Bush and Gore elections, or even in 2020 after Biden and Trump, the markets actually didn't care who was in the office. They actually just wanted closure. Oh. And that's a big thing. That's what the markets pay attention to, and they want to make sure that it is something that at least they know who is going to be there, and then they know whose policies they can follow. So one of the other things, just in the short run, for some of our American audience, is Chairman Powell, for instance, who's the head of the Fed, and he's actually a Republican. He just reduced the interest rates by 50 basis points, which is half a percentage. Well, in this situation, like ex-President Trump had said, I'm not going to reelect, or I'm not going to put forward to have Powell coming back. So there's this conspiracy theory, for instance, well, Powell knows Trump is not going to elect him. And as you know, central banks are supposed to be independent, although in many developing countries they are not. But in this situation, Powell knows, hey, maybe just again, some conspiracy theorists, maybe I should help like Harris gets elected. Again, that's the principle. He's a man of principle. I'm not saying that, but there always these little politics can play a role when it comes to central bank and economics. And also, the other thing we have to also remember, interest rates, with all the borrowing around the globe, it has such a dire effect in actually going forward. Basically, what we have been doing for many, many years, especially in the United States, we've been just borrowing from our future generations and kicking that can down the road. So eventually, the higher rate could not be afforded. So that's another reason that it's important to pay attention to interest rates, and knowing that the governments cannot go on any longer. And that's, I think, a couple of years ago when these high interest rates started, I mentioned in some of our presentations, and I said, the world cannot afford higher interest rates. Old days, we could just devalue our currencies, but now, all of a sudden, the Treasury Secretary, like Janet Yellen, can say, wait a minute, we got a lot of debt. Let's reduce the rate. So there's a lot of influence from that point of view. So basically at the end of the day, it is politicians are politicians. Regardless of who's out there, they are very short-term oriented. The politicians, whether they're Senate, they're in Congress, what happens, unfortunately, don't want to diminish the power and that's also the obviously integrity. But at the end of the day, they mostly worried about re-elections, so they look at band-aids. So unfortunately, fundamentally, things don't get fixed. It's always, well, what is the next election? So after the election has already gone through, finalized, they already start raising funds for the following election. So the focus is, how can I get reelected? And that's the problem that we have when it comes to politics. So, again, putting that aside, so I'm going to share some statistics and some history with you, and basically look at what has happened with the generally Democrat in power as president, Republicans in power in president. How about Congress, who has a Congress on their side? So we will have a journey going back and look at some of these statistics to see, well, what could happen. So with that, we can have a little journey. One of the things also I have to tell you, we really, people look at the last few months, and once we look at what just happened, all of a sudden we have a sitting president that, President Biden, he was running for re-election, and all of a sudden he decided that, well, maybe I shouldn't, and now we have the Vice President Harris. When we look at the history, we see that, we did have this happen in the past, and that was in 1968, when a sitting president did not seek re-election. It was a little different. It was Lyndon Johnson in 1968. And then we also, this year, that was unusual, we had two assassination attempts on ex-President Trump. We go back in 1968, also, candidate Robert Kennedy, he was assassinated less than 3 months after President Johnson decided not to run. So what we see that it is a history, it has happened in the past. And again, President Johnson was a Democratic president. Of course, President Nixon got elected, so there was a Republican who got elected. But the interesting thing is, the S&P 500, the markets in the United States, they rallied 15% during the period between Johnson's announcement and end of the year. So with all this volatility, all this, again, not knowing what's going to happen, actually the markets, they did, they resolved themselves, they were resolute. So they were up. And we are going through the similar things. So then the markets in 1968, they were actually up about 7.7%, which was, better than, averages are 11%. But generally, what happens in election years, the markets are generally less than what the average year is. So when we look at market returns, what happened, the third year of a president, which was 2023 in our case, is the best year by far. When we go back and we look at the history for since 1928, we see that the markets are up 13.5% in average on the third year. And of course, last year we had a very good year in the United States. The fourth year, which is the election year, generally is the second best. And then the third best is the year one, that the new president is already elected, and basically they are ready to go. That average is about 6.7%. The worst year of any presidency in election years is year number two. And the reason for that is generally presidents, they know they have 4 years. They bring all the things that they want to, as far as all the bills, all the plans that they have, they do it in year two because they know they have 2 years. If they mess it up, they can correct it. If there's any elections, they can take care of it. So basically, that's what the second year is like, up only 3.3%. Generally, it's only positive 54% of the time, while the year three, 78% of the time, you're going to be in a bull market and you'll be up. Even year four, 75% of the time, you know that it's going to be a positive year. So the reason I say this, if you're an investor, generally investing in this end of the second year of a president, looking forward to year 3 and 4 is a good bet. On the other hand, year one and year two, the things are not going to be that great. So it is important to pay attention as far as how the market behave. So I'm just giving, again, these are based on history, has, again, not much to do with who's in charge at that time. Generally, they basically kind of follow that pattern. Now, remember, when we have the election, we do have 3 outcomes. Whether we're going to have a Republican divided government, which I mean, the Congress, the House and Senate will be in the other end, or we have a Democrat split government. So that's one scenario. The second thing is we could have a sweep. We could have a Democrat in power with the Congress, both houses with them. And of course, you could have a split in the houses too, so that's like a subset. Or we could have Republicans with all the Republicans. So there is a policy consensus. Believe it or not, the markets, they actually love to have divided government. They like the gridlock. They don't want somebody really taking and dictating the whole thing. So generally, we've had our best returns has been when we had a Democrat president and we've had Republicans in charge in the Congress. So that's the best scenario when we have that division in the executive office and legislative office. So how are we doing time-wise? I don't want to keep talking.
No, we're doing well. We're doing well. We'll take a little break. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with this laptop. But
Well,
so another tip that I will give you is the markets, they generally behave better when you have an incumbent president. And the reason is that the known factor, right? So it's almost you knowing somebody's good or bad, at least you know who it is. So generally, the markets react positively because of that fact that they know the policies. So when you go back to 1928 to present, we see that incumbent president, when it wins, the markets actually, the average in the election year is 13.4%, which is better than the average year for S&P, which is about 10.1%. Now, if during all the presidential years, if you average it out, it's about 11.3%. Now, if you have a new president is elected, generally the markets do less than average. It's about 9.3%. So again, I'm throwing you a lot of numbers, but when there's a new president is elected, the bond market actually does the best compared to other ones. So the stocks don't do as well, but the bonds do better. So that's when we think about averages as far as elections go, and basically stocks and bonds. Now, when we go back, again, we've had since 1928, we've had 22, now we have 24 elections before 2020. But when we have these elections, actually 19 out of 23 years, again, the markets have returned positive. And then Democrat was in office, and then new Democrat was elected, the markets actually were up 11%. And when a Democrat was in office and a Republican was elected, actually was 12.9%. So it's interesting that changing guards from Democrats to Republicans, that has boded well. On the other hand, when you go back in the history, if somebody asks me, when you think about Republicans and Democrats, what are your predictions as far as knowing the policies? And generally, Republicans are considered to be business friendly. So the markets generally would like to have a Republican president. Democrats are more into more of the social programs and less, sometimes not all the time, but less business friendly. So you would think a Democrat will be less friendly to the markets than Republicans. But would you believe that the Democrats, when you go back to 1923 and on, the Democrats have actually by far overperformed a Republican president when we use averages, when we look at the numbers, and we see that actually these Democrats, you look at, we start from Roosevelt in 1932, which came after Hoover, all the way we come to President Obama, and we see that the years that they've been in charge, they have actually outperformed the Republicans, and that could be a mystery, right? Because again, you would think, why the president that they're not much business friendly? They're the ones who actually are not friendly. So, by the way, I'm trying to still get in and here. That Laurie, I think I'm in. How's that? So, would you like me to continue on the phone, or can I come in?
No, come on in. I'll just put a little break up here. Let's put a little break up and give you a chance to get in. I'll keep you on the phone though, just in case. Okay.
Sure.
All right. Well, we'll be right back after this little break, and Dr. Ramin will be joining us in person. Well, good morning, everyone. And aren't we just the flexible ones, right?
Good morning.
Where there's a will, there's a way, right?
Yes.
So, welcome back, everyone. You're watching the Today Show here on the Disability Channel. And of course, on Tuesday, it's all about money. And Dr. Ramin has been talking about how a presidential election affects the markets. And I'm picking up on a few little patterns here, Ramin. Wow. And when it's so amazing to be interested in history because history helps us with the future. And so many people are not interested in knowing what's happened in the past, but we need to go to the past to help predict our future, as far as I'm concerned. And when we don't have a good picture of our history and our past, not that smart, right? So, and you are a history buff when it comes to finance, that's for sure. And thank you for all the valuable information so far. So, how are you doing down there in California again before we get
Oh, we're
started?
doing great. It's a beautiful day. Sorry about a little hiccup, but
That's
I'm
okay.
glad we could at least manage it. So, yes, and this is a fascinating subject because, as I mentioned, elections do matter, but in a different way. It's the more of the history and the tendency. And as I mentioned, that the markets they actually like a divided government when there's a Democrat in charge and there's a split Congress. They generally do 14%. But and when the Democrat presidents and the Republican Congress, like Bill Clinton had that, the markets like that. They also like Republican sweep. When the Republicans sweep, they also, again, the business friendly. So you have the Congress and the presidents. But my goodness, when there's the Republican president and Democratic Congress, they really dislike that. That's like 5% return. So we look at 14% with the president, Democratic presidents, and Republican Congress versus 5% when there's a Republican president and Democratic Congress. But going back when I said, again, the markets, it's amazing that they do much better when there's in average. So again, when we look at history, when we break down, we see presidents like, Clinton had a wonderful run as far as the returns were over 15%. Of course, the timing was also important, coming with the internet technology boom, end of the Cold War. So all the defense budget, which was going to the Cold War, moved to the technology. For the first time, I think, in the history, we've only had the balanced budget twice, and it happened under Clinton. So, and that was again with the Republican Congress. So that really boded well. But generally, Democrats do well. And the reason for that, believe it or not, is not because of the policies in a sense of that the Republicans are very bad. It's generally the Democrats, they take over when there's a crisis, general crisis. And because the markets are already really down, so when they take over, things on the bottom, they start picking up. And I give you some examples, so that might make sense. So, for instance, we look at the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover comes into the, it goes for the election, and then 1932, the markets drop, I think 27.9 or 28%. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he gets elected. So the market started moving, even though it was very volatile, and we had World War II in the meantime. Because of the social programs, the generally the populations in the times of crisis, they rather choose someone who's friendly and social, as far as fiscal side of things and monetary side of things. They're more looser and they're going to help. So socially, so they focus on Democrats. You go back to 2008 and President Bush II, the markets were down 38.5%. We bottomed in 2008. Remember, we had the financial crisis, and while President Oba took over, now we have interest rates going down. And of course, he was elected again because of the attitude that, well, he will provide more social programs and that net safety net. So the markets behaved better because we're coming from the bottom up in a sense rather than from top to down. Even President Clinton, when he came power, a lot of things. We had a recession under, second president, first President Bush. So every time there's a crisis, and then we had COVID happen last year of uh, President Trump. So you see, in the times of crisis, generally Democrats get elected. On the other hand, when things are really good, now we are topping. Republicans get elected because the markets like them. They say, "Oh, let's keep them. Let's like," and we already very expensive. So how
Hmm.
far can we go? And that's what happened with like President Bush II. He got elected. Of course, that was that the year 2000 was, it goes in the history of elections, what happened, with the Supreme Court and everything. But we had the internet bubble, we had the technology bubble. The markets are already up so much that they crash. I mean, NASDAQ dropped 75% for the next 3 years. So in this case, Bush had, of course, had 9/11. Then we had during 2007, 2008, he had basically the financial crisis. So he went through all that. So basically, that's the reason what happens with the Democrats' presidents when they come in. Um, One of the, again, tidbits, I'm gonna kind of jump different place now, is the markets do not like, as I said, they do not like the volatility, uncertainty, and when things happen, they don't like it. But one of the tricks I will share with you is, especially in like President Trump's situation, right? So you can see their policies, what they're talking about. Well, we had like elections in 2016, 2020. So what I'm doing, everybody's watching the markets, we're watching the news. I'm watching the currencies. I'm watching Mexican peso. I'm watching Chinese renminbi or yuan, and I'm watching Iranian rial. And the real, so Mexican peso with the, again, the policy of, you know, his attitude, Mr. Trump, President Trump, toward the immigration and other things. So obviously the Mexican government or the economy would have preferred to work with Democrats, which are more lenient. So if you, again, this is 6 weeks from now, so I let my audience, you can check it. So when like everybody was betting on President uh, at that time, I mean, for presidential 2016, we had two new faces. We had, although everybody knew them, but we had Hillary Clinton versus Trump. So these are new faces. But what happened was uh, um, Hillary was she was leading. Actually, that was a time that everybody thought, well, she will win. But what happened with watching Mexican peso and Chinese yuan, the same thing with what happened during the 2020. You notice that Mexican peso was going down in 2016. So that showed us that they were worried about Trump getting elected. So by watching currency, sometimes you can get a little heads up, or the Chinese yuan, again, because of the policies of ex-President Trump. So these are some of the tidbits. Another tidbit I will share with you is again, we don't have the crystal ball. We don't know who's going to get elected. There's so many variables. But historically, what we have seen almost, to the bit, I mean, I would say more than 90% batting average. If the stock market is positive from August 1st till the end of October, that 3 months, if you have positive stock market, the incumbent party will win, especially if there's incumbent president. So we are watching, and we could see that with President Trump. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the markets were down 0.2% on October 31st. So it really flat from August 1st to October 31st. The stock, on the other hand, uh, you know, again, that was like in 2016. We also had the similar situation when it was down. So if the market's up nicely, for instance, I gave you right now from August 1st till today, the markets are up about 4.5%. The question is, can they keep it? October usually becomes volatile and nasty. So if October 31st comes and stock market is up nicely 3, 4, 5, even 2%, the markets usually like to have their incumbent party. So that's another like a tidbit of a heads up, and that's something I just want to share. So this is something that our audience can follow themselves, right? So they can see it. The other thing is, I mean, naturally, some policies matter. Which party is in power? One of them will be basically, if like we have President Harris in office, well, clean energy will be in favor, right? So you can see the stocks of, or the companies who are related to clean energy, they will do better than if it was under President Trump. We will also see, like under President Trump, the way he's talking about cryptocurrencies and traditional energy sector, or even they think about firearms. Old days, it will be like healthcare. The pharmaceutical will be the ones that they will, under Democrats, because of price control, I think they will actually go down. But at the end, again, everything comes down to the fundamentals of the economy rather than what is uh, the specific policies of the presidents. The other thing is, the first year of any president is not that great, as we mentioned. And one of the reasons is, believe it or not, Pat, every time we had a first-time president, they've had a recession 52% of the time. With the new president, we've had a recession. So what that tells us, the possibility of having a recession in 2025 is, more than 50% at this time. So just a food for thought, again, coming from the history. And uh, also looking at internationally, when we look at the presidents, we see, as I mentioned, like President Clinton. I went back to, the last four. President Biden, we still don't have complete. We have to wait till end of this year. So I was looking at the average, which markets did the best. So under President Clinton, the U.S. markets were up average of 15.2%. Under President Trump, they were average up 11.5% in average. Actually, even they did better than that. They, at the end, they were up 16%. But under President Clinton, international equities did well as well. They were up 10.8%. And under President Obama, equities were up 13.8%. International did the 9.2%, and emerging markets did well. So what we see is, in average, emerging markets have done well under President Obama and President Trump. On the other hand, under President Clinton, emerging markets were down 4%. So these are the things that globally they watch it, and it's very much important to see um, how the dollar behaves. Is there a fate in dollar depending on the president in there? We talk about geopolitics. We look at, again, right now, as you know, in the Middle East there's a chaos, and I was talking to someone over there. They're really worried. They're worried what's going to happen. So that also plays a role in the prices of commodities, whether it's crude oil or gold or other types of commodities. So I want to give you again a little more statistics going back as far as 1950s, and looking in the best year of any president since World War II. We're looking at who had the best return, and that at the first year, President Clinton in his term, his first year was up 28.1%. So he's the leader. Then President Kennedy, which only had first term, and his first year was 26.5%. President Obama, after re-elected his second term, the markets went up 23.8%. President Bush won after President Reagan's term had ended. His returns was 22.7%, and President Trump, the first year of his presidency, the markets were up 21.2%, and President Johnson, his first term, was up 19.9%. The negatives, the worst performing president in the first year was President George Bush II. And of course, remember, it's 2001. Everything is falling apart. The markets actually dropped 21.8%. Then President Eisenhower in his second term, we were down 14%. President Carter, the first year, was 10%. And President Nixon was down 7.9%. And so these are just a little history again, what has happened as far as history goes. And then, as I mentioned, generally the first year and out of 24 elections that we've had, 54% of the time we do get a recession. So just between the first and second year. So just we watch for that. As far as the other thing is the volatility. So the markets, as I mentioned, they become volatile right before elections, and just if we have the result, there's no contest, or there are not objections. Usually, then they resolve themselves, and the markets after a week, the volatility dies down, and generally the next 2 months they do well. So that's another thing that the markets like to see, that certainty again. But the volatility plays a role right before the elections and just a week after. The other part is, again, talk about incumbent, and it is something about, again, that volatility. When the incumbent president or the party, which is right now, again, we have Kamala Harris, is the party, it retains the presidency, actually the volatility declines. And that declining of the volatility before the election, it tells you that the incumbent will be winning. So that's one of the again, signs. If that the volatility really increases the periods coming to the election, then generally the higher volatility shows that the other party could be elected. There's a little uneasiness. So So I want to wrap it up because of the time running out. So,
Go ahead.
okay, at the end of the day, what I will recommend our audience
Sorry.
again to pay attention. It's about the fundamentals of the economy, and if the people are feeling comfortable, the consumer, how they feel, and they want to change, or do they want in this situation what we have today, for instance, people know ex-president Trump, so it's not an unknown, it's more Kamala Harris they're getting to know, although Kamala Harris is incumbent in a way. So this is a really interesting, because President Biden and President Trump both they were known quantity, so it was a lot easier to make that decision. This is a little uncertainty, but this is what I recommend. The last word I would say: watch the again the fundamentals, and one of the things you can learn to know, are the markets going to continue, are we really stretched, is there's a indicator called Buffett indicator, like after Warren Buffett. And Warren, what Buffett he was looking at is he looks at the GDP of the government, or any government. We can do it in India, but in the United States, you look at, well, all the uh, gross domestic product. We look at the whole thing, um, and then what we want to do, we look at what is the market value of the stock market, and then he would divide again the stock market by uh, the gross domestic products, and if they were over 85%, then the markets are expensive. So he bet he's not a market timer, but he becomes cautious. So every time it goes more than 100%, 120%, then he says, the stock market is very getting expensive. Just be careful. So I think more than just looking at the elections, we want to pay attention to this, the total market of stock market divided by the GDP. So I leave you at this. Right now, today, the percentage is 200%. And so that's
Wow.
something that tells us the markets, we are an all-time high in S&P, in Dow Jones. This is the all-time high we've ever been, but also we are very richly valued. So the question is, regardless of who's in the office, just be a little cautious and pay attention to the markets themselves. So that's my last word. I hope
Wow.
it was helpful. I hope you got something out of this. But anyway, and my apologies again for the technical difficulties.
No problem.
Here we are. It was a
No
half
need
and half.
no
How's that?
need to apologize for something we can't control. This might even be enough information to change the way someone may choose to vote. You could have impacted the election today with the
Oh, good God.
information you shared. Wow. And I'm not even in the States to vote. But, if I've been thinking on one path, I might change my mind after listening to what you had to say today. So it was very interesting and very informative. And as always, researched to the 10th degree. And thank you so very much for that today. I think it's very timely given what's going on in America around their politics and who's going to be president. So, wow. Thank you so much. Something else I picked up on too, and it was based on what you said today, but also the other last week, that a lot of times you talked about, the markets being soft or up or down, and how they recover. Low if there is a crisis, they may go down, but they pop back up not long after that. So this kind of sounds similar but different. And thank you for that. It was great.
My pleasure.
And I don't know if you saw Sylvia's comment. She says, "Wow, so interesting. Thanks for the insight. Your knowledge is amazing and spot on." Aha.
Thank
Because
you,
people are
Sylvia.
watching.
Appreciate it.
People are watching. And
Thank you.
Sylvia also paid another compliment. When you couldn't get on, she said, "See, great job, Dr. Laurie. you're able to handle any situation.
That's true.
Listen, the show must go on. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? And as
Absolutely.
Dr. Robbie Motter says, just keep showing up. Just keep showing up.
Yeah.
So thank you to our audience today. We had a
Yes.
few live guests today. And of course, we're streaming live right now on Laurie Davis' Facebook page, YouTube, Laurie Davis show host. So if you want to go in and see the show a later date, or you want to share it, we love it when you share the show with other people. So please feel free to do that. And of course, I'll be back in an hour with Doug Smith, and we're interviewing a man who knows a lot about the Toronto Maple Leafs. So we're in for a treat on the press box an hour from now. So goodbye for now, and we'll talk later. And have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.